Hi, thanks for stopping by and checking out this video. Today I'm going to run down my top 5 pieces of essential recording equipment to build a great sounding project home studio. One of the best parts about being a musician in 2021 is that it's possible to create a great sounding recording right from either your home, your bedroom, your basement, whatever it might be in your house. You can build a good sounding project studio and you don't need a huge budget. There also are a couple different things to consider as far as where you should put the bulk of your budget. So I'll be covering the things that I think matter the most, and also depending on your scenario and what you're trying to accomplish, what I think you're best suited to spend your money on. So for number 1, it's going to be kind of a combo of things. It's going to be the interface, which is your way of getting your signal into your computer, and then the speakers, which is your way of then being able to hear back what it is inside your computer. You really can't do anything in music without having both of these components. The good news is there's quality budget options for both of these. It just depends on, again, what you're trying to accomplish. Well, so we'll start with interfaces first. I've used Focusrite products for a really long time, and I've also used MOTU or Mark of the Unicorn products for a long time as well, and I've gotten great results with both of these with their budget entry-level models. Focusrite has a great line of products that I would highly recommend. The older Scarlett USB interfaces are really nice for the money, and I really like the way their older FireWire Sapphire line sounds as well. Now, if your computer doesn't have a FireWire interface, then going with something like a USB interface definitely makes sense. I use a MOTU M2 currently. It's a really affordable unit. I think it costs around $150, and I've been really pleased with how the preamps sound and how the interface itself performs. I'd recommend staying away from extreme budget interfaces, although some brands like Behringer have gotten a whole lot better. I'd still recommend, something either like a Focusrite or an M-Audio interface is definitely going to be reliable. It'll last a while and you'll get a nice clean signal into your computer. Now, since they are budget preamps, they're not going to color the tone a whole lot in that sort of analog goodness, so just kind of be aware, any budget preamp or any budget interface that has preamps, they're going to be a pretty flat response, which is fine. If you can capture the most flat, sort of clear signal into your computer, that's going to give you the best result when it comes to EQing and, mixing your product in your DAW. You can't really polish a turd, so if there's some weird frequencies that have been built up in the actual capturing of the audio, there's not really a way to EQ that out without really destroying the signal. So trying to capture that nice, clean, flat signal is definitely something I would recommend. The other thing here is the speakers. Now, the speakers are your way of being able to hear what it is that you're even doing in your computer, so I would recommend probably spending the most of your budget here on the speakers. The better the speakers are, the more flat their response is going to be. And what I mean by that is they're not going to have an artificial bass boost or an artificial mid boost or an artificial high-end boost, whatever the different EQ curves on budget near-field monitor reference monitors are going to color the sound. And then what's going to end up happening is you're going to be mixing and making decisions, and then you go and get in the car and it's like, whoa, where did the mids go? Or whoa, there's way too much mids. So having speakers that have a nice flat response is really what your goal is. I'd really recommend near-field reference speakers. I use a pair of Adam A7X speakers that are absolutely fantastic, but they are a little bit on the expensive side. It's around $1,500 for a pair. So they're not cheap, but again, this would be the spot I would recommend spending the most amount of your budget on. The second thing to consider is your DAW or digital audio workstation, and ultimately which DAW you choose really just depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish. all DAWs essentially do the same thing. They give you the ability to record or capture audio, hear it back, and process it. A lot of DAWs also have the ability to run software or MIDI instruments as well. So all DAWs essentially do the same thing, but they are specialized in different categories. So if you're planning on being in a band that's going to be playing live, or if you're an electronic artist that you're going to be performing or playing your songs live, Abelton Live would obviously be a good DAW to consider for what you're planning on accomplishing. If you primarily write beats, or maybe you write electronic music, a DAW like Reason might make sense because it's primarily a MIDI or software instrument or synthesizer instrument-based DAW, with the other aspects kind of almost secondary. Reason is sort of tagged along the ability to record actual audio and use third-party plugins kind of late to the game. For a long time, Reason was, just native. You couldn't use anything other than just propeller head products. Reason is a great DAW and it's very unique. I personally use MOTU's Digital Performer. I'm probably one of about 10 people out there that does. Now DP is normally geared towards film scoring. That's the one thing I actually happen to not do. I use DP because it's what I had coming out of college and it was what I knew, so why bother changing? Other DAWs like Reaper are a great budget DAW. Reaper is a fully featured DAW that I've seen and heard plenty of people create great sounding mixes and masters in, and I think the license is only $60. A copy of Digital Performer is like around $500. Most of them run in between $300 to $500 to $600. So, Reaper at around $60 to $100, that's a pretty good bargain for something that's fully featured you can use third-party plugins with. You can even get started with just using something like Audacity or even GarageBand just to get started recording, getting used to what it's like to use a DAW. Both of those are free options, but they're obviously going to be limited in what you're going to be able to accomplish. So if your goals are anything larger than just being a singer-songwriter with like an acoustic guitar and one microphone you're singing into, you're probably going to want to consider a full DAW. There's great other options out there. Obviously Pro Tools is an industry standard, as well as Logic. Those are fantastic options as well. So really it comes down to what it is you're planning on accomplishing. If you're just going to be mixing and mastering bands that you're recording, something like Pro Tools or Logic is going to work great. If you work more in the beat making or electronic world, maybe something like Reason or Ableton Live makes sense. And if you're weird like me, maybe use Digital Performer. So now that we're about halfway through this video, if you're digging it, please hit like and subscribe. Do all the stupid YouTube stuff. Helps my little channel continue to grow. Here on A Minor Error, it's the creative home for everything that I do musically, which is primarily instrumental progressive metal music. I also do product reviews and tip videos like this, as well as some free music lessons. Next thing to consider are plugins. I know that might seem a little backwards because I haven't talked about the computer yet, but we're kind of getting there. So plugins are third-party products that do different things to the audio that you've recorded, basically process it in different ways. This includes better sounding reverbs, EQs, or compressors than what is in your DAW, just kind of native plugins. It also includes other things like virtual software instruments, as well as saturation plugins. The thing to consider here before you choose your computer is what are the size of your projects, and are you planning on running your plugins native or on your computer system, or are you going to use some sort of like a third-party accelerator card, something like what Universal Audio does? If you're planning on going the UA route, then you're not going to need to worry as much about getting a really powerful computer because you're going to be running those plugins on that different processing source. So personally, I really like Slate Digital's Everything Bundle. Those are the plugins I primarily use, although I do use some Waves ones and other ones that I've gotten, especially off of Plugin Alliance. The great thing about Slate Digital is that it's $15 a month for everything that they've got. When they come up with new plugins, you just automatically get them, and you can cancel and resubscribe at any time with their service. So it's kind of simple easy, and their plugins aren't too CPU heavy. Obviously, if you get running a bunch of instances, it's gonna pile up on your computer, so it depends on how large your project file is, which is a good segue into the computer. So for number 4, you're gonna need to consider your computer. Again, everything really comes down to what your planned productions are going to be. If it's something simple and small, then you're not gonna need to spend a whole lot of money on your computer. You might even be able to get away with running everything on a laptop. If you're planning on doing a larger production with 50, 60, 70 tracks in it, you're obviously gonna need a more powerful workstation. Now, without diving too much into the Mac versus PC divide, it really just depends on what you're most comfortable with. I've used Mac since college, so that's what I know and that's what I'm most comfortable with. And there are some very powerful, more budget Macs out there on the used market. So I use a 2010 Mac Pro tower that's been upgraded to a 5.1 firmware. It's basically the most powerful cheese grater older style Mac. The great thing about these towers is they're really easy to expand and add either more hard drives to or more RAM to, and for me, I'm able to run projects that are pretty large, running all of my mastering chain while I mix. So my computer was like around $800, somewhere around there. You can definitely go the poor Mac route and be able to get a good sounding large production going on. Last thing to consider is acoustic treatment. So acoustic treatment for your room is just a way of kind of controlling the first reflections of your speakers when they hit the wall directly behind you, and then also trying to control any buildup of either unwanted frequencies or bass frequencies. They tend to be in the corners of your room. So the very first thing you need to do before you even plan on purchasing any acoustic treatment is set up your room as best as you possibly can. Obviously, since you're in your home, you're not going to have a perfectly designed control room, but there are a couple simple principles you want to keep in mind. The very first thing is just where you place your desk in the room. What you want to try to do is get your desk centered right in the middle of a wall. You want to try to avoid putting your desk either in a corner, that's bad, or too close to a corner. What's going to happen is frequencies, either bass frequencies usually or could be mid-range frequencies, will build up in a weird artificial way that will then affect your mixing choices, which will then make it not translate across different sources. You know, you hop in the car and it just sounds like crap. So very first, get your workstation set up in the middle of your wall. Then what we're going to want to do is buy some bass traps for the top corners. They're basically large foam pieces that will help capture any excess sort of built up bass frequencies that can happen. And you're also going to want some acoustic paneling for the wall directly behind you. That's going to help absorb the very first reflection. So the sound comes out of your speakers, hits the wall behind you. That's where you want to put your acoustic paneling. The next thing is you're going to want to get speaker pads. You don't want your speakers rattling on the desk or something like that. Again, that's going to affect the frequencies and how you're hearing them. So just some nice foam pads for your speakers to be sitting on to help isolate them from your desk is fantastic. Another important thing to remember is that near field reference speakers are designed to be set up in basically a triangle kind of a position where there's a sort of sweet spot where you're really going to be able to hear what's going on. So if you set up your speakers and you're sitting in basically the wrong way, you're not going to be hearing what's going on. So what you need to do is measure the distance from the tweeters and then to your ears basically, and create everything on an equal length, basically triangle. So equal distance from your speakers, from each other, to your ears, aim the tweeters right at your ears, and sit in that comfortable position whenever you're mixing. That's critical, again, to really be able to hear what's going on. Now, you don't need to spend a lot of money on the acoustic treatment. In fact, this is probably the area I would say budget the least amount of money. You can buy just cheap foam paneling and tack it to the wall, and that's gonna work. You don't need to go out and buy super expensive Auralex products or something like that. I do happen to use a nice pair of Auralex speaker pads for my speakers to sit on. They're not too expensive. It's the only piece of foam that I've ever spent, kind of a legitimate sum of money on. Otherwise, any old whatever cheapo thing you can find like off of eBay or go to like an arts and crafts store, that's totally gonna work just to get you started and help control those frequencies. So thank you for watching this video. Again, it really comes down to what you're planning on doing with your productions. If it's something small, like a singer-songwriter, you really don't need to spend a lot of money. I didn't even cover microphones, but if you're a singer-songwriter, basically buy the best possible mic you can afford, get a decent budget interface, whatever free DAW, even something like GarageBand, off and running. If you're trying to do something a little bit more involved with like electronic music, and you're gonna need a lot of synthesizers, considering something like Ableton Live or Reason, I think makes a lot of sense. And if you're planning on just basically mixing and recording bands, Pro Tools, Logic, Reaper, Cubase, there's so many different ones. They'll all work great. Honestly, it's whatever you feel most comfortable with or whatever's in your budget. So thanks again. Let me know down below what you think of this video and what you've spent your largest amount of money on in your home studio.